Psychology in Seattle.
So, Bob, I put out on Facebook for our listeners to submit any questions that they would want you and I to answer. So I thought we would turn on the recorder on my computer here, set up the microphones, sit down, look at each other, have some eye contact, ask the questions, and answer them so that people can benefit or be bored by the answers. What do you say, Bob?
I say bored.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. Who are you, Bob?
I'm your old friend from grad school way back when, and a therapist in practice here in Seattle as well.
So the first question here is from a top fan on Facebook. Did you know there's such a thing called a top fan?
What's a top fan?
I think it's, I don't know. I think it's someone who just interacts a lot with the page, and you get like a little badge by Facebook saying you're a top fan. So it's top fan Christina. She says, I personally love that Bob shares so much about himself. I always appreciate when he shares his own struggles in his past. So that's just a comment. But she also asks, please talk more about borderline or DBT. And that's a pretty broad thing, but I have been getting a couple questions or emails from people asking about quiet borderlines. Have you heard of such a thing?
I don't know. Maybe.
Like it doesn't stick out as like a term that you that you know about or heard about.
Well, what I have heard is that there are folks who have emotion dysregulation, and there are folks who have over-controlled emotions. I'm not sure that's the term that they use to describe it, but the treatment was originally developed for folks who have dysregulation, and the dysregulation, Marsha Linehan, she was really not interested in borderline personality disorder, but interested in suicide prevention. And it turns out this population of people who do self-injury and have suicide thoughts and try to kill themselves often have BPD.
Right.
So she ended up being a BPD expert. And her population are people that have dysregulation. So their emotions are, very big and extreme. That's a little loaded. They're big. They're fast changing. They're, too much anger, too much shame, too much fear. And they get in the way of life and relationships and success and all that. And then there's another population, and it turns out the little bit I know is that DBT does not help people that have over-control, problems with over-control, where they inhibit their emotions. And so somebody called, what's that fellow's name? Tom Lynch. He's a professor in North Carolina, I think UNC, developed a thing called Radically Open DBT, RODBT. And I met somebody about 6 months ago for an hour who does that here in town. Fascinating.
As a therapist?
Yeah, therapist who runs it's actually intensive outpatient clinic over there in First Hill. And the little bit I know, and I'm probably gonna botch this, but what they do is they make you do exercises that are about letting go of control. So like some of them might be, like the kinds of exercises you see in improv classes where you sort of step out of your shell and you have to do something and it's a little bit uncomfortable, but the idea is to stay in the interaction and not, kind of let go of self-control, let go of self-consciousness as best you can, do the exercise, and then talk about it afterwards.
Spontaneous.
Yeah. It's a lot about spontaneity, right? And as I understand it, the treatment comes out of his marriage with his wife who has trouble with over-control. And so they developed this thing, and turns out it really helps.
So have you had clients like this before?
That have over-control?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how does it differ from, so it's conceptualized as a part of borderline?
I think so, yeah.
And so it's a borderline type that is over-control.
Right.
And what does that look like exactly?
So my experience, I'm thinking of some folks that I've had that I think are have this trouble, is that they tend to be very quiet, very self-critical, very much worried about the consequences of their actions on others. And their suffering tends to be quiet. So it's not like dysregulation with, really intense anger or really intense panic, right? It's more like, it's like overregulation, where they don't actually display much emotion and they don't take much risk, and they tend to have isolative lives. You know, maybe there's just work and then that's it, and not much beyond that, and not much social contact, and probably about zero intimacy. I'm not talking about sexual intimacy, though that might be a piece of it, but just, you know, real connection with someone else or friends. So they tend to be very lonely. And the two people I'm thinking of that I think had this profile were just lovely, just really, really lovely and tragic.
And a lot of self-hatred?
I think that's a big piece of it, yeah.
In contrast to non-quiet borderlines? Because when I heard this description, when I was reading about it, I thought, well, it sounds to me like the two, if we were to differentiate between, say, non-quiet borderline or just, you know, regular borderline and then quiet borderline, I was reading the description of quiet borderline and I was like, well, it sounds like all the things that regular borderline has, except without the noticeable outward behaviors such as self-destruction, aggression, anger, pushing people away, engaging in life and then pushing people away, that kind of thing. Is that...
that's my impression of it as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's typified also by an internal control, a lot of controls on one's emotions. I'm guessing because as they were developing their preoccupied attachment style, their borderline personality, they were punished for acting out or for expressing themselves in some kind of way.
Right.
And learned, okay, not only can I not love myself and not depend on other people for consistent attunement and love and attention and safety, but I also can't really express my discomfort with it because I'm going to be punished severely or something real bad's going to happen to me. So I have this deep suffering and I can't really express it. Is that
That's how I read it too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you see it as a spectrum? Because when I first read about it, my initial conceptualization, which I think was ill-conceived, was that it was a sort of borderline presentation where they weren't as traumatized growing up, so that because like people at the very high end of borderline personality disorder are often quite aggressive, quite noticeably upset, quite noticeably demanding, and can push people away very quickly. It can be very off-putting to people once you get to know them. People around them will talk about how there's a lot of drama in their life and there's a lot of hurt feelings around them. Now, of course, they don't wake up in the morning and think, I'm gonna hurt other people's feelings. No. They're suffering to such a degree that it's, you know, the analogy is, if I stub my toe and someone asks me for a hug and I'm in utter pain, I'm going to tell them to fuck off right now. Or I guess a better example would be, I stub my toe and they ask me for a favor or something like, hey, could you help me carry this box? I'd be like, I'm in pain here. Like, screw you. Yeah. You know, that is the feeling, you know, when you're in utter pain and you're in a literal constant state of feeling deep, deep trauma, rejection, and someone asks you for a favor, or someone mildly complains about you, or intimates that they're displeased with you somehow, it's just too much. It's the last straw on the camel's back, and you can't take. So at the higher end, you're going to have people who are going to be very noticeable and, shall we say, not characterized as quiet borderlines, right? Yeah. But then you have people that are further down the spectrum, say at like the 50% mark or something, who aren't suffering to such a degree. They weren't mistreated as much, or they didn't experience mistreatment as much. And therefore, as they experience that suffering and that pain, they have a little bit more ability to withstand it, and also a little bit more ability to regulate the emotions so that they don't self-destruct their relationships, and therefore can have deep, deep suffering that is not trivial at all. 50% borderline is not trivial, but it doesn't result in the quintessential outward behaviors that we typically stereotype as borderline. But it sounds to me like what you're saying, the conceptualization of quiet borderline, or what was the term used? Restrictive, over-controlled borderline, is that they could be suffering just as much as everyone else.
Yeah.
And they have this additional trauma of not being able to express themselves. And so they typically isolate and learn to cope by being extremely controlling of their internal emotions and their expressiveness.
I would say ruled by fear and shame.
Yeah, which to me sounds like they're worse off than someone who doesn't have that, because in order to heal, you have to first become a little bit more spontaneous, a little bit less restrictive on your emotional expression, and then you can begin the work. But, so I don't know. What do you think?
I think if you want to make fire, you got to rub two sticks together. And if those sticks don't want to get together, there's not going to be too much fire.
Yeah.
And so these folks, the risks they have to take just to reach beyond themselves, I can't imagine how frightening that must be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So another question here from patron Emily, whom I just had on the podcast last week to talk about her experience both as a client and as a clinician running a process group. Have you ever run or been in a process group?
No. Oh, well, grad school, but that's it.
Yeah. In group therapy class?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was in a process group in college for maybe half a semester, though. That was a long, long time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, is it your impression that process groups are on the decline?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they take a lot of work to put together. They're not in vogue, and we have this is a voguish kind of field.
Yeah. Like DBT's in vogue.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It'll run its course. And that doesn't mean it will be less effective. It just means that something else will replace it. I think group therapy is both fascinating, it's hard, and has the potential to be highly useful.
Yeah, well, while we're on the topic of this, before we get to Emily's question, which I think is quite profound once we get there, but some other people are asking about groups, and let me see if I can get to those questions here. Kyla on Facebook asks, I would love to hear more about groups. So what do you think it was like? Because you run groups, you don't run process groups.
No.
You run class groups.
Yeah, there's a discouragement, an explicit discouragement of process.
Okay. But they're groups of teaching DBT skills, and people watching it might say, this is DBT group therapy.
Yeah.
So what's it like? Group as opposed to individual or couples or something.
It's formatted around a curriculum. So I always say to people, it's curriculum driven, not person driven, not issue driven. And our job is actually to work our way through a manual. We do. It's mine's 2.5 hours. That's the standard research model. First hour is homework review, then a break, and then the second hour is whatever's next in the book, and we just work our way through. In group, we are so people get a chance to talk about their skills practice during homework review, and we focus on what skills people did and not what they didn't do, and not just how was the week in general, because we have 8 students and we only have an hour. It would be dull. It would also be, I think, really dissatisfying for people if they treated homework review like a kind of general check-in. So I just try to keep people, people will tell narrative, they'll tell a story about how they used a skill, but I try to make sure that we're focused on skills that we did. And I encourage people to focus on the skills that they actually do, because humans will do more what they pay attention to. I think it's pretty weird, because in our culture, you don't brag, you don't boast, you don't talk about, hey, here's what I did well. You are modest and you're self-deprecating. That's kind of how it rolls. And so in my class, I think people have to adjust to that. And I think my main job is, I got to teach a curriculum. I think that's probably 45% of my job. And the rest of it is make that room a safe place. So it ain't a process group, but it is essential that we feel good and safe with one another in order for people to do their best work, to dip a toe in the water. And so, I didn't know that till about maybe the last 2-3 years. I thought, if I teach this curriculum, that's good enough. Just be a good teacher to get this information across. And it's just far from enough. I think my main job, and probably my strength too, is making my students feel cared for. I do care about my students. It's not like a fake thing, but also safe.
It isn't fake, but it has to be communicated. I mean, that was one thing that I learned in graduate school, was that although I cared, I didn't have a way of showing I cared.
Yeah.
And so although you've always cared about your clients, it's a skill to exude or communicate or show or inject the notion into other people that you do care. And
I think it's learning to take the risk.
Yes, absolutely. And it's a behavioral repertoire thing. I was raised as a man, boy, male, and I was the third, I was the middle of 4 kids. I was not, in my family, I did not have the role of caretaker. I did not have I was raised to be a masculine person in the 70s. And there was no encouragement and no reward and no instruction and no modeling for how to, really pour on maternal caring, love, affection, safety, giving, attunement, excitement of your face where you're really like with someone.
Yeah.
And when I became a therapist at the age of 20, when I entered graduate school at the age of 24, I looked around at my classmates, and particularly there's this one video, I always talk about this. It was a Carl Rogers group therapy video. And he was with a colleague of his, another guy, who had, I wish I could find this video, but it's black and white, and I believe it's in Italy. There's like some famous group therapy film from Italy in the 50s, I think, or 60s. And his buddy was his, co-therapist, had this extremely effective ability to exude that kind of safety and compassion and power towards the group members. Because I remember the group members were, I believe, a bunch of Americans who were, 50s, 60s, very uptight. You could tell that they had just a lot of roiling emotions beneath the surface, but they're very, proper and sitting upright, and you could see that they're tentative, and and this guy had this way of really drawing people in. And I watched that, and and it was a man, so maybe that helped too. And I thought, I want to be able to do that because I feel it on the inside.
Right.
But I have no repertoire for that. I have no facial expression repertoire. I have no verbal repertoire. I have no tone of voice repertoire. I played football my whole life. I was expected to go to school and do well. I was expected to follow the rules. I was expected to, not be a dick to people. I was never expected to, look to another human being and really let out my compassion and show them that I really cared. And when I saw this guy do that, I said, I need to do that. And I think I don't know who or what or how, but somehow I came to the conclusion that it wasn't that I didn't have compassion, I just didn't have the ability to express it. And I remember really focusing on the word maternal. For some reason, it really resonated with me. That like maternal energy, of course, it's not a female energy per se, but
it's just a way to think about it.
Yeah, it's just the socialization, or the stereotype of maternalism. And so I get emails from people sometimes. A lot of young men will say, I want to be a therapist, or I'm training to be a therapist, and I feel like I don't have compassion. What I say, I'll ask a few questions to quickly assess whether or not they're a psychopath or not, which is possible. and usually they're not. And I will say, well, you just have to access the behaviors that you have to access your compassion and then figure out the behaviors that communicate what's inside. It's normal that you don't have those behavioral protocols because it seems weird that you would not have the it's a weird way of looking at our personalities or our upbringing, that we have certain behavioral protocols that we learn through modeling and through behavioral encouragement and rewarding and this sort of thing. And to not have a whole section of human interaction protocol. But of course it makes sense. Like it's totally analogous. Like I'm teaching applied couple therapy this quarter. And one of the things that I noticed right away with the role-playing students when they're role-playing couples therapy is they have zero protocols for how to do couple therapy. Like you and I, as couples therapists, we can sit down and it just pops into our head. There's just protocols that pop in our head. Hey, what do you guys want to talk about today? Just that one question you and I have asked thousands of times. And so it just comes to us. It's just a protocol.
Sure.
And it doesn't mean that, we're any smarter or better than anyone else. It just means we've done it a lot.
Unconscious competence at that point.
Yeah, it just becomes this rote automatic response. Like the sequence from, oh, there's a dead space of, there's silence here, to, well, what do I want, to how do I get there? What do I say? What do I do with my body? Is within 0.1 seconds. We make that choice. Other people, they're like, they don't even have the routine of asking the question to themselves, right. What do I want from this couple? What's the point of them sitting with me? And I see their brains just freezing. So I think most people can understand that competence, so to speak, but I don't think we talk enough about the competence of compassion expression, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense.
You were always pretty good at it, probably.
Oh, I as I look back now, I see lots and lots of holes, lots and lots of glib moments and ignorance. You might call it unconscious incompetence. The thing I learned from Marsha Linehan was, she's like everybody's grandma when she runs a DBT class.
Oh, really?
Yeah, really nice, very kind, very thoughtful, slow, warm. And I think when I was learning from her, from watching her teach, watching video, I just started emulating her. And so I was the 37-year-old guy who's in his head acting like everybody's grandma. And after a while, I didn't need that kind of model anymore. I didn't need to be grand maternal. I just started being me, but the warm part of me, the thoughtful, caring part of me. And it's stuff like smiling. It's stuff like leaning forward in my seat.
You didn't do that in the beginning of your career?
Oh, no, I did. But I started doing that with awareness on purpose, right? It was a willingness to show sadness and, to feel sad along with somebody. They code behavior when you're in one of these research studies. They watch the tape and they code your behavior because what they want to do is they want to make sure that the therapists are adhering to the treatment. Because if you do a research study, you want to make sure that you can say, we applied this treatment. And so you code, they have people that watch that stuff and code it for adherence to the model. You get upcoded if you tear up, which isn't to say you got to Meryl Streep it, because I can't
So
do
to put it into layman's terms, you get a upcode, meaning that you're coded as following the model. If you tear up as the clinician in DBT therapy in research. Interesting.
Yeah. And I can't Meryl Streep. I don't think Meryl Streep can Meryl Streep. I think when good actors act, they actually feel sadness, if that's what it is. I don't actually know if that's true, but I think that's true. I know for me, I can't just like have instant tears. I got to feel. If I feel sad, that's what happens. And I think that the expression of that communicates to people genuine love and care. Because how many times have clients said to you, well, this is your job. You don't really care. This is your job. You're paid to care. As if you can conjure that up, as if, and I think that's mostly people being afraid of not being cared for.
Right.
Yeah. So, and, I understand that. I've been in therapy for a lot of years, and I'm afraid of that sometimes too. But let's see, what was my point?
That you are genuine and grand maternal with your people.
Yeah, I guess that's a way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think another thing that you're saying here that I want to emphasize is that it's both something we do intentional, which can seem like that would be fake.
Yeah.
But it's not fake. I think part of it is like, there's this notion that for an emotion or an expression of something to be real and not fake, it has to be completely unconscious.
Yeah, that.
Like someone is telling you that their mother died today, and through your unconscious, this natural emotion happens and this natural expression happens where it's spontaneous and not calculated, not intentional. And although that can certainly happen sometimes, but it's pretty rare, particularly as a clinician, right? Because it's all day long with us. So, but it can happen for sure. I mean,
Sure.
I've one spontaneous thing that I can think of that happened not too long ago was I was teaching a class actually, and it was the first day. And I was just kind of going on this riff, and I was talking about, I think, how much I cared about clients or something, and I just burst into tears. And it wasn't just a tear, which I'm used to as a teacher and a supervisor and a therapist. I'm used to having uncontrollable water that sort of builds up.
Yeah.
But this was like sobby, like,
oh yeah, you were weepy.
Yeah. And it was surprising. And I have reached a point in my career where I'm confident enough to roll with something like that.
Hell yes.
And I was just like, oh, I guess I'm crying right now.
Yeah.
Or something like that. And I could just see all these trainees of therapy looking at me going, there's like 25 of them or something, looking at me just going, oh my God, is he okay? And yeah,
tears are provocative to people. We're scared of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's one of the bizarre things or bizarre manifestations, not bizarre. We have a bizarre culture that manifests in very strong ways.
Yeah.
And one of the ways is that I will see late grad school trainees, meaning their third year, and they will still apologize when they cry.
Oh, yeah.
So we're in a case consultation. We're talking about a lot of things, their cases, their personal lives, their countertransference, their development as a professional. And I would say every time I meet, there's at least one person that will cry at least a little bit, if not a lot.
Sure.
And half the time, if not most of the time, the individual will apologize and say, "Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know what's happening right now." And it's such a strange thing because we don't apologize when we laugh. We don't apologize if we're pissed off at someone who cuts us off on the freeway. Usually, maybe we should. I don't know, but we almost always apologize when we cry.
Yeah,
and that is a powerful representation of the shame that we have in our society around such a thing, around emotions in general, and sadness and crying in particular. And it is the strangest thing because I could understand being a little worried about anger because anger can result in hostility and aggression and bad harm to other people. When in the world did crying or your own personal sadness negatively affect another person? It's bizarre that people apologize for it. And I get why, because of our bizarre, society and the things we teach our people. And so
I think it's great. You're modeling for your students being a real, genuine, live, full human being.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that you and I are talking about, though, is maybe you could call it strategic empathy.
Good. Get me back on track here. Right. So what I tell people, and it's kind of true in personal relationships well, is you have to use your instrument, which is your body and your facial expression and your vibe, that you can feel compassion, till Tuesday. But if you don't use your instrument to communicate that in an effective way, in a way that the client will receive and really absorb, in a way that's not fake, then the compassion is kind of wasted to a certain extent. So you have to use your intention and your body, and sometimes that requires some intentionality, which could be perceived as fake, but really what it is, an analogy would be your friend's mother dies, but you don't know the mother, and you personally aren't sad about that loss because you personally don't know that person's mother, but you like your friend, and you know what it must be like to lose such a relationship and a person. And so you say, okay, well, how do I communicate to this person that I care? What should I do? What should I say? Well, that's intentional. But if you just did spontaneous things, you might not do anything.
Yeah.
Because the next time you see that person, it could be a month later or something. You could even be in a situation where the individual is out having a good time, and right then and there you're supposed to like have this spontaneous sadness, or so intentionality is okay. It's shows that you care.
Yeah.
And so, but it's a skill, if you will, to be able to do that effectively without coming across like you're being fake.
Right.
Not like you're so good at faking that you come across as genuine. But you are so good at being genuine, intentional genuineness, which sounds funny, I guess. I don't know.
It does sound a little funny.
I don't know if I've ever really talked about it, but you can relate to that.
Oh, hell yeah. That's real. And then there's this sort of, just because I feel it doesn't mean I necessarily want to express it or think that it's best in the best interest of my client to express. So one wants to be mindful of what's our general goal. How is this expression of sadness or irritation or shame or compassion or guilt or whatever it is, joy, how is this in service of my client or my client's therapy? Right? Because I feel it doesn't mean it ain't my therapy. It ain't me letting it all hang out. That's not strategic. That's not mindful.
Yeah. Having said that, and I'm sure you would agree that there are times when we both intuit that it's okay to just be spontaneous.
Hell yes.
And have our own quote unquote joy or whatever.
Absolutely.
But there are other times where it's like, oh, okay, it's important that I emphasize that I understand or that I feel or that I am with them in this way or something. Yeah. One more thing before we go to break. So Kyla asked what it's, more about groups. The last thing I'll say about that is that groups are scary as a clinician. I think, when I haven't ran a group in many years, but when I think back to the groups I did run, they were very scary for me, but it wasn't unbearable. They were exhilarating, they were chaotic, and very memorable. When I think back to all the experience professionally I've had during that time when I did do groups, I remember a lot of instances of the group therapy moments.
Oh, yeah.
There are groups that I led as a therapist 20 plus years ago and can remember specific moments. I remember one group was only for 10 weeks, and I can remember 3 or 4 moments from that span. Whereas there are clients from that same year where you would show me the name and I wouldn't remember who they were.
Yeah.
Maybe if I saw their face or something, I'd remember. But so they can be quite memorable, quite scary, and quite chaotic. The groups that I ran were a lot of teenagers, I'll say. So that was a factor.
Oh, sure.
Well, I guess I ran a group not too long ago of adults who had parents suffering, or the parents of kids suffering from addiction. That was more of a support group. Anyway, the last question here about groups from Andy on Facebook asks, is there such a thing as online group therapy? And if so, is it actually helpful? Do you know, Bob?
I never heard of that, and I would be surprised if it were very helpful.
I've never heard of it either, but I'm sure it exists. I'm sure it will exist in the future. I mean, online therapy is becoming more prevalent. I imagine that it would, I guess, be over Skype or Zoom, where it's a conference call, and it's harder to use one's instrument or to understand other people's states on such a flat screen experience. Maybe when virtual reality comes out, somehow that might help. I don't know.
You said the most interesting thing a couple months ago about that. You said the problem you saw with using Skype and Zoom and the video things is people don't make eye contact. They're looking at a screen. They're not looking at the camera, so they don't actually look at each other.
Yeah.
And I thought about that. I'm like, yes, that's one of the big problems with this medium.
Yeah.
Is it actually blocks contact.
Yeah, it seems like there obviously could be a device where you would just put the camera where the eyes, about where the eyes would be or something. I don't know. Andy also asked, there are communities of people who are dealing with similar issues, but they are online and they are run by regular people. So he says it can feel a bit like an echo chamber. Yeah, I've seen this. So on Reddit or Facebook or other places, Instagram, there are communities where people will, say you're suffering from an eating disorder or something, and you find a community online that is thriving and lots of posting and lots of suggestions and subreddits, that sort of thing. And it can feel like group therapy, I think, according to what Andy is saying. And it's not group therapy. You could consider it a support group of sorts for sure. And I've certainly seen this, and it can be wonderful. I mean, you Google certain things, like just eating disorders, for example, and the extreme surface information, which is accurate but lacks all soul. It's just the facts, and they're not interesting. And if I suffered from an eating disorder and I read this stuff, I would feel like, okay, so what? And okay. But then you go to like a subreddit on eating disorders and you get extremely articulate people who are describing their experience, maybe even clinicians chiming in here and there. It can be an extreme rich experience and a much more detailed, much more, shall we say, soulful experience. And he also says it can feel a bit like an echo chamber. It can become that because certain communities can start to propagate certain ideas that become privileged or dogma, if you will. This is where the incel community, the red pill people, the MGTOW people, you don't even know about
what those are.
I've told you about them before, I think.
Yeah.
Incels are involuntary celibate people who are almost mostly men, if not all, and they want to have sex, they want to fall in love, and they're having a hard time, and they go online and they find this incel community, and at first it's this kind of support where people are talking about how I get you, you're not alone, it's hard, it can feel really bad, it feels really bad to be rejected over such silly things. It's frustrating to try and have nothing work for years and years and years, and then these ideas start to sift through. That what I would equate it with is sort of a mob mentality or a group think kind of thing, where certain ideas are convenient and there's really no one around in the group to oppose it, or not a strong enough voice. And so a certain idea starts to sneak into this group, which is originally just like, hey, we want to band together. Maybe we'll help each other out. Maybe we'll be a support group. Maybe we'll... And so all those things are good. But these certain ideas start to, one person introduces an idea like, well, it's feminism's fault.
Oh.
And it's liberals' fault.
Oh.
And it's women's fault.
Oh, wow.
Women have been taught that they can control men through sex.
Oh, my.
And all women are like this. And the idea is introduced by a minority, maybe even just one person. But since no one in the group likes women very much at this point because they're resentful, they're hurt. Well, let me back up. All of them are hurt.
Yeah.
All of them are in a state of hurt, which can lead to anger and resentment and prejudice and stereotyping, especially if the idea releases them from some sort of shame that they have around it.
Bingo.
So, yeah. And the idea is, well, it's not your fault. There's nothing wrong with you. There's something wrong with society, and it's called feminism. And so the idea grows, and then maybe some people start to oppose it, but then other people start to give backup information. And again, there's not a strong enough effort because, of course, there's no women in the group, one. Two, anyone who, and it's a self-selecting out and in of people. So if you fall in love and manage to have sex and blah, 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 then you no longer are in the incel community in general. You're like, oh, I don't need this anymore. And so you're gone. You don't stick around to like argue with people. And then there's always a new batch of hurt, shamed, men who are entering, and they come upon this very strong, solid seeming argument that it's feminists' fault and blah, 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 blah. And it's a convenient story. We see this phenomenon in all sorts of things. Like when I think about our own bubble in liberal Seattle, let's see if I can think of something that is we retreat to our liberalism, or say our echo chamber, our group, our tribe, to escape from threats that we see from Republicans of them, taking away rights, or increasing the guns, or going to war, or whatever it is that we feel threatened by.
Right.
Putting up a wall, discriminating against women or minorities or something. And then we go to some kind of solace with each other. And then someone introduces this idea that, well, Republicans are all assholes, or they're all stupid, or they are, this alien race of people who don't have any compassion or something. And then it becomes a very convenient argument for us, where we will say, well, yeah, that must be what it is. They're this totally strange race of people who have no caring for other human beings. And then if you oppose that, so imagine someone in liberal Seattle standing up, and who is a Democrat and is a liberal, standing up and saying, I don't think we should characterize Trump voters, or even Trump himself, in such a extreme negative way. Imagine how fast you would be slapped down. In fact, I'm one of those people, by the way.
You might slap.
No, I'm one of this. Well, no, I would hope I wouldn't slap. I'm one of the people who actually stands up and says, I don't like the way you're talking about people who vote for Trump.
Right.
It's fine to say that they're wrong about abortion rights, or they're wrong about immigration, or they're wrong about some budgetary thing, or they're wrong about some foreign policy thing. That's fine. You can absolutely. That's the political process. But to paint them as evil or stupid or uncaring, or they don't have love, or they're backward somehow, or is not only empirically not true, but just unfair and weirdly propagandist, if you will.
I grabbed my phone and started typing on it because I wanted to write something down. It wasn't because I was ignoring you. I just didn't want to forget. But
I thought you were texting someone.
No, not at all. I was thinking about listening to what you were saying, and I was thinking, it's very emotionally satisfying if I'm a member of, say, what's incel?
Incel.
Incel. If I'm a member of incel and somebody says, hey, the cause of the problem is feminism, say, it's really emotionally satisfying to have that idea.
Yeah.
And so if it's emotionally satisfying, it's easy for me to slide into believing that therefore it must be true. We
Right.
like to believe that what's emotionally satisfying is true.
Right.
We're vulnerable to that kind of, I don't know, bias.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's much more distressing to think maybe it is partially me.
Maybe they're not evil,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like,
maybe there is something about me. Now, what I would say...
oh, yeah, it is. Oh, no, I'm listening to what you're saying. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe it is me. Yeah.
Right. But maybe it's not the thing you think it is.
Right.
You know, to the incel people, because I've actually had clients who they weren't, because incel wasn't around back then, but I've had clients who were totally in this kind of scenario. Mm-hmm. Back then, it was mainly the pickup artist community. That was that group.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we worked on was getting out of that mindset of demonizing the other, and then also getting out of the mindset of there's something deeply wrong and flawed and unlovable about me. Mm. And then it's like, well, then what is it then? Well, what it is one, it's hard to find a soulmate for everybody. Two, there are things that you might actually be doing inadvertently that is pushing people away. Like certain attitudes you have or certain vibes you give off or something. Or another thing that I worked on a lot with him was one of the guys I'm thinking of was it's a numbers game. Everyone who has found someone, or on average, the people who have found their soulmate probably burned through dozens of people before that, which meant they had to burn through hundreds of people just to meet those dozens. Because for every 50 people that you actually went on a first date, you got your hopes up for probably 1,000 people. Right. And so the ratio of rejection to first date is extremely high. And then the ratio of first date to second date is very high. The ratio of 6-month relationships to beyond 6 months is very high. And then the relationship, the ratio between all the people that you've had a crush on or thought maybe to the soulmate you've had is probably like 1,000 to 1 or something. And so when I'm talking to these kind of guys and they're like, well, I've tried so many times and it hasn't worked. And it's like, well, everyone goes through that.
Yeah.
And
that's probably on a normal curve distribution.
Right.
And there probably is such a thing as bad luck.
Bad luck, absolutely. Also, like I said, if your parents were a little awkward, then you're going to be a little awkward. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely another awkward lid to your pot. Do you know how many awkward people have loving relationships? There's nothing fucking wrong with being geeky and weird and awkward. For every cool person, there's a cool person. For every awkward person, there's an awkward person. And it's fine, and of course, childhood trauma plays a role in developing the deep, deep shame and which can lead in deep, deep hatred of the other. Anyway, let's take a break, and when we get back, let's talk about a little bit more. What do you say, Bob?
Sounds good.
All right, we're back from the break, and as always, I tell people to become a patron of the podcast. That's how we know you like the podcast. Also, join us on Facebook and Instagram. We, for example, today posted on Facebook, "Hey, I'm going to talk to Bob soon. What do you want us to talk about?" If you're not on Facebook or Instagram, you're not going to get any of those kinds of things, and it's a fun little place to be. All right, so Emily, patron Emily, finally. Back to her. She asks you, do you miss having a Dunkin Donuts on every corner in Pennsylvania?
There's a Dunkin Donuts in Rainier Valley.
Okay.
But
it's pretty far from your house.
Yeah, that's pretty far. Yeah. I've had to give up donuts because they make me fat.
And what's the deal with Dunkin' Donuts? Is like,
Well, people that love coffee love Dunkin' Donuts coffee. I don't know. I don't love coffee, so I don't really get that.
I think it's kind of watery in my opinion.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't. Maybe that's what they love. I don't. It's like Krispy Kreme. It's like a local-ish chain, and I mean, I think they're national, but they're prevalent in Philadelphia area where
So
I'm from.
what's the ritual for a Pennsylvania person at Dunkin' Donuts? Like, what's the procedure? What's the, like, say someone goes back to Pennsylvania and they're like, okay, I can't wait to go to Dunkin' Donuts.
Oh, yeah.
And what?
Me, it's a Boston cream.
Okay.
Yeah, or sometimes a vanilla cream, which is really weird because it's not vanilla. It's like that icing you get on a Safeway cake, that grease icing. It's like that's shoved into a donut, or jelly. I love jelly.
So is this kind of like Dairy Queen where they're like, when I drive, so in Seattle, there's no Dairy Queens.
That's right.
It's bizarre.
Yeah, it
you
is.
step right outside of Seattle and there's an instant Dairy Queen. And whenever I drive by one, Stacy and I were on a road trip recently to the ocean and drove by a Dairy Queen. I wasn't hungry. I didn't need the calories, but I had to stop, and I have to get a Blizzard with a lot of chunks in it, like
so good.
either the brownie one or the Butterfinger one.
Oh, good choice.
And it's like. It's not like amazing food. There's better things to eat. Arguably, like Froyo is pretty good too.
Yeah, right.
But it reminds me of my childhood.
Sure.
So is it like that, Dunkin' Donuts?
Oh yeah, definitely like that.
I see.
Yeah. Emily, I miss cheesesteaks more than I miss Dunkin' Donuts.
Oh, you miss the cheesesteaks.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Where's your favorite cheesesteak place?
Lenny and Pat's in Haddonfield, New Jersey.
Lenny and Pat's.
Yeah.
Haddonfield. What's different about them?
I don't know.
They're big, right?
Yeah.
And
Soft. The bread is like awesome and
soft.
Yeah, and I always get mine with not too much onions and peppers. I don't really like that, but provolone and sauce, like red sauce,
Red sauce.
Marinara sauce.
Marinara.
Yeah.
So they put the steak. They grill up the steak.
Yeah.
They melt the cheese on it.
Yeah.
In an oven or something?
No, just on the grill.
On the grill.
They scoop it into the...
Oh. And then you put on marinara sauce.
They put that on.
Oh, they put it on.
Yeah.
So you order like the one with
Pizza
marinara
steak.
sauce. Pizza steak.
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good.
I once went to Lenny and Pat's and I show up and I say to the guy, okay, how much? And he goes, $10. And I guess at the time that was a lot of money. And I'm like, oh, totally worth it. And he goes, okay, for you free then. But I did have to pay the $5. Yeah. But Lee's Hoagies makes a good cheesesteak. That's a local chain out around where my family live.
Have you had a good cheesesteak-ish thing in Seattle?
Yeah, Wedgwood Ale House makes a pretty good cheesesteak.
Wedgwood Ale House.
Yeah.
Where's Wedgwood Ale House?
It's 85th and 35th.
85th and 35th, all the way out there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then there's actually a restaurant in town called Philadelphia Fever down there on Madison. In the valley. And they make a good cheesesteak.
Really?
They sell Philly products, yeah. So tasty cakes and so forth.
Well, I'll have to check that out. There used to be one place that sold it that I don't know if they were very good, that was in Rainier.
Yeah.
That I think was torn down because they put the train station where it is right now. I'm not sure.
Really?
Or DSHS or something. Anyway. I got to go there today.
Yeah?
That's what I'm going to do.
Oh, nice.
Which one? Should I go Wedgwood or should I go... Wedgwood's closer.
Yeah, you live up here. You could go to the Elliott Bay Pub, the Elliott Bay Ale House.
Oh, yeah. That's
has a pretty
cool.
good cheesesteak, but you won't get it with sauce.
Because they don't have sauce?
They don't do that, yeah. I don't even think they do that at the ale house, at the Wedgwood place either.
Oh.
But it's still good.
But I want the other
you
one
want
you're
a pizza
saying...
steak, you got to go down to Philadelphia Fever, probably. Though I think there might be another place in Rainier Valley, but not a place I've ever been to.
So, Facebook, Josh says, I want to hear more old stories from 10 plus years ago about Bob and Kirk.
Oh, no, you don't. Or maybe I just don't want to tell them.
Well, let me give some directions. So Cole on Facebook said, favorite grad school memories. Do you have any favorite grad school memories? It doesn't have to be us, obviously, but anything.
Oh. Well, actually, my first memory of you was in ProSem when you said, is this a favorite memory? I don't know. It's a fond one. When you said, my name's Kirk, and this is the intro, and you're like, and just like everybody else in Seattle, I'm in a band. And all I thought was, I'm not in a band. And then my other first memory of you is when after class, you're like, let's go get a beer. And we went over to the Sit and Spin.
I don't remember that.
That's the first time you and me hung out.
What part of our graduate school was that? When was that? Was that pro sem?
I think it was either first quarter or second quarter. It was early.
Because we didn't really hang out in earnest until later.
Yeah.
Right. But I asked you to hang out?
Yeah, and it was going to be Laura and Annette, and I think they bagged.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so it was just the two of us. I remember being nervous about it and also being fascinated because you cut your own hair back then.
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I started with like a really, really short haircut.
Yeah.
And then I don't think I cut it at all because by the end of graduate school, it was down to my butt.
Yeah, it was long.
My favorite grad school memories, I wrote a little list here.
Oh,
So my little list is that pro sem in general, I would say. So pro sem was a 6-month course. It was a 2-quarter course. There's pro sem 1, pro sem 2, and there was just 6 of us, which I think was a little weird. I think normally there would have been more, but there were only like 6 or 8 of us or something.
It was small.
And there was you, me, Laura, Nanette, the guy who listened to the Mariners game during class.
Yeah, I didn't like him.
Gary.
The
other woman who was queer, I believe.
April.
Oh,
April. God, I haven't thought about her in a long time.
And maybe another person, I'm not sure. But anyway, so this is 25 years ago. We can remember it, right? And there was no table. We sat in a very small circle that included our professor, Flora Ostro, who I just bumped into recently and texted you a picture of the two of us.
I like Flora.
I posted a picture of the two of us, me and Flora, on Facebook, I believe. And just all the bonding and experiences we had and how intense it was. I mean, we were taking other classes, but I don't remember them.
No.
I remember that class very, very well. And how we all bonded and became friends in that class, Other grad school memories I have is just, again, general memories of starting our friendship, going out, playing cards, watching Sonics games, that kind of thing.
Played a lot of cards.
Graduating, I remember you coming to my graduate.
So
Did you walk?
I did. I graduated about 6 months before you, though.
So, but I didn't go to your ceremony, I guess.
I don't remember.
Yeah, I don't remember going to your ceremony, but you came to mine.
I did. Really fun.
Yeah. It was kind of an epic night because there was the ceremony bit, which was, its own kind of thing. And then there was like dinner with my family, my parents, my siblings, my aunts and uncles, my cousins. It was a big to-do. And then we went out afterwards. There was a graduation party in a hotel room that we went to.
That was down South Center, right?
Yeah.
Down SeaTac?
Yeah.
Why was it down there?
Well, I don't know if it was SeaTac. I mean, because SeaTac is another area, but...
It's Doubletree Inn.
Yeah, like Tukwila-y area.
Oh, okay, yeah. All right.
And like down by the mall, I think.
Yeah, why were we there?
Because someone that I was graduating with was having a party, and it was just like high school, even though we were all, in our 20s or 30s. Yeah. Some of us were in our 50s, the 60s, I remember.
Well, that's true.
And someone rented a hotel room and said, come party with us at the hotel. And everyone went there. It was awkward and weird. And I just remember feeling like I wanted it to be more fun, but it was just kind of awkward.
Just somehow not.
I remember the developmental class we took and the personal myths that we said.
Oh, wow. That was a hell of a day.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, did you know that she told me I had to rewrite my myth?
Yeah.
That my myth was not a myth.
Right.
Yeah.
So we've talked about this before on the podcast, but there was this class about developmental psychology that we took, and it was taught by an instructor that was very Antioch for the time, which is much more hippie and much more creative and experiential, if you will.
Yeah.
And we sat in a big circle every class and barely learned anything technical.
I'd say that's true, yeah.
But talked a lot about the transitional spaces that we go through.
Oh, right. She was big on the liminal space.
Liminal space, that's right. Betwixt and Between was the book that
was the one, yeah.
And it was a transition time for Antioch in that 10, 20 years prior to that, all classes were like that. In fact, 20 years prior, they literally sat on beanbags in a room and just talked, and that's how. And the degree was only a year long. Actually, it was 9 months long.
Wow,
that's how you got your master's in psychology, and became a therapist.
You're late to the game,
right? And so by the time we went to graduate school in the mid '90s, it had become a little bit more professional. I would say, a lot more professional, but not as professional as it is now.
Yeah.
Like a developmental class now at Antioch would not. It would not fly to have that syllabus.
Not a beanbag chair in sight.
Right. So one of the big assignment that she had for us was that we were going to write our own personal myth.
So it was your life story in myth form, I think, was kind of the idea, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I had no idea what I was doing. I am not a creative writer. I don't really understand that form of creativity. And I remember, and to tip it off, we, instead of meeting the last 2 weeks of the class, we met at her house.
Saturday.
For an entire Saturday from like 8 to 8. I remember it was long. Because all 20 something of us read our entire myth and then processed it as well, sitting in her living room.
On the floor.
And, I just remember, I probably said this the last time we talked about this, was I wrote my myth and I was terrified and I wanted it to be good, but I wanted it to be interesting to the audience on some level, but I had no idea how to do that. And I wrote, there's some part of my myth where someone dies, like the Obi-Wan Kenobi of the story. And I wrote it I was such a bad writer that I wrote it in this very abrupt way. I said something like, and then she died, which you're laughing at. And that was the class. Everyone burst out in laughter because it sounded so funny.
Right.
And I was like, that was not a funny part.
Oh man, what a moment.
But I felt actually great because I thought, well, it's better to be inadvertently funny than to be boring or something, right?
Right.
So I thought, okay, I'll go with that. It's a funny moment. But it was also another moment in my life where, I don't know if you get this, I'm guessing you do, where just expressing yourself in public, people will start laughing because they think you're funny in general. Do you get that sometimes?
I don't know.
Every once in a while, I kind of get that. Like I'll be in a group, people will be sharing or something, and no one knows me. And I say something and people just start laughing, even though I'm not trying to be funny. It's like there's something about my delivery or something that makes people laugh, if that makes any sense.
Maybe you're a humorous person?
Well, I think what it is, because I've reacted to other people like this too. I think when people stand up in groups and start talking and we don't know them, or we don't know them very well, I think we instantly try to categorize them as some archetype of group talker or lecturer or something. And there's a certain vibe like Keanu Reeves in Bill and Ted's, where I can kind of have that vibe sometimes, where I can come across kind of like a goof who doesn't care, isn't worried about how I come across or something like that, or a brother that always likes to joke all the time. That kind of archetype.
Okay.
The dude who is easygoing, like Chris Pratt. That kind of archetype where Chris Pratt stands up. If you don't know who Chris Pratt is, he's from Guardians of the Galaxy, the new Jurassic Park movies. When he stands up, he could read his grocery list and I would laugh because there's just something hilarious about the guy. And I think maybe sometimes I give off that vibe.
Makes sense. Which
can be a good thing and a bad thing, I suppose. The other class that sticks out in my mind is human sexuality.
Oh, sure.
We both took human sexuality together, and I remember watching the video that was explicit sex. Do you remember that?
No.
Oh, you don't remember that? We watched porn. The 1996 version of pornography at the time.
Don't remember that.
Yeah, and it was very hippie-ish and lots of hair. And it was so it was several scenes, and it was very technical, but you could categorize it as porn. And one of the scenes was a guy masturbating. You don't remember this?
No, I don't remember.
It was just a static shot of a guy from beginning to end masturbating. Wow. So it's, 7-10 minutes of this hairy 70s hippie naked masturbating.
Yeah.
And then you don't remember any of this stuff.
I don't remember that.
There was a gay man sex scene. There was a heterosexual, I think, like oral sex scene.
Wow.
I'm surprised you don't remember this.
I'm surprised too. The only thing I remember 2 or 3 things from that class. I remember sitting in the room. Just random. I remember everybody went out the last week. Everybody had to go someplace that you weren't used to going. So we went to a lesbian bar.
You and I?
Yeah, you and Laura and Nanette.
We went to the Wild Rose?
Wild Rose, yeah.
I do not remember that.
And then the other thing I remember is that, you had to write your own sexual autobiography.
Yeah.
And he said you could submit it anonymously.
Yeah.
So you're supposed to use the last 4 digits of your social security number. But I was so used to writing papers and formatting that I had my name in the heading. So every page after the first page has Gettle, page number 2, page number 3 or whatever.
Do you have that paper?
Yeah.
Okay, I do too. I haven't read it in probably 15 years.
Yeah, longer. Yeah.
So just so you know, this is very Antiochian, and I hope other classes do this or other programs do this too. So it's human sexuality, and our main paper was us writing a autobiography of our sexual development, which meant the first time you had sex and what that was like, or any sexual traumas you went through, or the first time you masturbated, or any kind of thoughts you had and this kind of stuff. And it was extremely personal.
Oh, yeah, really personal.
Yeah. And we probably talked about this the last time, if we've ever talked about this in the podcast before. You know that the instructor was prosecuted and sentenced for having sex with a minor.
Yeah.
So this guy who was well liked and well trusted, and was a veteran clinician in the Seattle area, was a sex therapist. I don't think he was certified, but did all sorts of sex education and sex therapy, and worked in a teenage group home, by the way.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And had been caught in a sting or something, propositioning a 16-year-old boy to have sex. I can't remember all the details. It was a sting, or it might have even been a client. I probably not a client.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. And it became a very sensational story, and he was instantly fired. And that was probably 10 years ago ish. Our human sexuality element at our university has been kind of like recovering ever since. I would say we've finally recovered from it recently, but because he was such a force at Antioch and one of the only people who could really teach that class well, it took a long time for the program to recover from his exit.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Now we have at Antioch in my program, the CFT program, we have a program on human sexuality specialization, and also training you to become a certified sex therapist.
That's really cool.
So we're really taking the bull by the horns.
Would you have taken that track if you were a student now?
Maybe.
I might too.
But I was really wanting to graduate as fast as possible.
Oh, well, yeah, there's that.
Because I wanted to start practicing.
Yeah.
So I probably would have said, well, maybe later.
Yeah.
But not now. Anyway, well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Thanks for joining us out there. Please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.